Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Jeff Thompson, co-owner of Thompson Strawberry Farms. Thank you for talking with me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
When did you start working at the farm?
I graduated from high school in 1972, and I took a year off to travel, and then I came back to work with my father at September of '73.
And today you co-own it with your brother.
That's correct, yeah.
Can you tell me about the history of the farm? How was it founded, and how did it develop, where located, and stuff like that?
So the farm actually started over in Summers, and I'm actually sixth generation. So my great-great-great-great-grandfather was a Stetson, and he bought property in Summers before 1940. And sometime after that, there's documentation that he owned 320 acres of land in Section 13 of Summers and paid $24.33 for the taxes and property taxes and school taxes on that 320 acres back in the 1850s, I assume.
Okay.
So,
and then after, did he start the farm that
so I'm a, I don't really know much history about him. I don't, my great-grandfather, which was a Thompson, was the station agent in Summers. And he married a Stetson. And so he inherited the Stetson farm.
Okay.
And he had two sons. One was my grandfather, and so the farm was split between my grandfather and his brother.
Okay. And when did, how did the farm start? Have you always grown strawberries?
No, so my grandfather graduated from college from Madison in 1909, and he came back to farm after graduation, and I'm just assuming that it was a dairy farm at that time. And then in 1914, he bought 50 acres with across the road, which would be on the north side of Highway E, which would be the southeast corner of Parkside right now. And he went into a partnership with his brother. And in 1922, they started growing cherry. They started planting a cherry orchard, 20 acres of cherries. And by 1924, they had 80 acres of apples and 20 acres of cherries.
Do you know when strawberries were planted?
I know that my father came back to the farm in like 1946, and soon after that they started raising strawberries. But I was told that, years ago on Sheridan Road and Highway A, I believe, was a school called Berryville. And back in the 20s, there was a pier right off of A, went out into Lake Michigan. And that area up there is very sandy, and so they grew a lot of strawberries, and that's where Berryville came from. So.
Okay, and how long did your grandfather partner with his brother?
Just a couple of years. So I think, so he graduated in '09, and they finished planting the orchard in '24, and in 1927, a classmate from college of his came into the partnership, a fellow by the name of Richard Markin. And the year later, my grandfather's brother left the partnership. So for 30 years, it was Thompson, Markin, Orchard.
Okay. All right, so that brings us to about 1957.
Yeah, and so at that time, Mr. Markin retired, and my father had come back to the farm after graduating from Madison. And he took over the farm in '57, growing apples and cherries and strawberries.
So strawberries predated your dad.
I think so,
taking-
a little
okay.
bit, yeah.
Okay. Now, for historical perspective, in 1966, the state was looking at land where your farm was for a university site.
Correct.
Okay. And how did that play out?
So I understand that the university took 700 acres, and there was 29 families that owned this 700 acres. And at the time, my grandfather had passed away in 1962, and so this is 5 years later. I guess the farm was in an estate where my grandmother, being the head of the estate, and so they were offered a price for the farm as if it was bare farmland. They had an appraiser who said the orchard was pretty mature and on its last legs. So, yeah, in 1967, I guess, 66, 67 is when they sold to the county, and then the county gave the land to the state for Parkside, is the way I understand it.
And then what did your dad do with the farm? With the farm? The farm was gone. So what did he do after that?
So sometime in the early 50s, they had been growing strawberries for quite a few years, but they grew them to sell. So they had pickers come in. A lot of workers from American Motors would come after work and pick for strawberries. Anyway, in the early 50s, one summer they had a really hot summer, and of course, with hot weather, the strawberries come on really fast. And so they couldn't keep ahead of picking the strawberries. And so my father went down to WIP and put an ad out on the radio saying, "Come pick your own strawberries." And so people came out, in droves. It was, even though they had this hot weather, but that was the first year that we had pick your own. And then after that, we've been basically pick your own strawberries since then.
And how long is the season for strawberries?
It's really a pretty short season. A typical season would probably start between the 10th and 15th of June and then runs through the 4th of July. But
So all that work was
Yes.
just for 3 years of the ripening of the strawberries.
yeah, for 3 weeks.
Okay, so where did your father move the farm?
So there was some, after the sale of this property, he still owned 50 acres on the south side of Highway E, which was the original Stetson homestead, I would say. But he didn't think that was enough. 50 acres would be enough to, one, just grow strawberries, and two, grow. And a hunting buddy of his from Bristol, who was a dairy farmer, happened to was driving down Highway 50 and noticed someone had just put up a for sale sign on this land about a mile west of I-94 on Highway 50. So he called my father, and my father and mother went out and looked at it, and they saw the potential, because with strawberries you need frost protection, and we need a water supply, and there was this creek, the river, that ran through the farm. And so at that time there was actually 2 farms for sale, and so they ended up purchasing both farms after going in a loan from the bank, and they ended up with like 364 acres, I believe, between the 2 farms.
Okay. And then did he grow anything other than strawberries once he went out there?
So no, in the beginning that's all he grew was strawberries, but over in summers I would say they probably might have had like 20, 25 acres of strawberries, and when he moved out to Bristol, he started right away growing 50 acres of strawberries. So when they planted the strawberries, I believe the first year they planted them was in '68, 50 acres, which was a huge undertaking. So you don't fruit the strawberries the first year they're planted, so it was '69 would have been the first year that we fruited them. And the remainder of the land they grew mostly corn, which we used for covering the strawberries then.
Okay.
corn stalks.
Now, you had 50 acres in strawberries pretty much through the 70s, 80s?
Yes, so in the 70s we started with 50 acres, and we would plant a new field every other year. So, and then, so we would fruit them for 2 years. The first year they didn't fruit. The second year we would fruit them, and then the third year we'd fruit them, and then we'd have another 50 acres. And so we would rotate these 50 acres across this 364 acres. And we were having good years. You know, like every year it was 20% more than the year before. We just, you know, people, pick your own industry was just going hot. It was really hot. And I came back in 73, and then my brother became involved when he graduated. And so by the end of the 70s and the early 80s, we were fruiting 150 acres of strawberries, all pick your own.
100, always 150 acres in fruiting strawberries?
Yes, in fruiting strawberries, right. So
and others would lie fallow.
Correct. So then for 1 year there'd be 200 acres when you planted them in the spring, and then after the harvest we'd take out 50 acres, and so yeah, and so we did that probably until like the mid 80s, and then the pick your own industry just kind of died. It instead of going from every year being 20% better than the year before, we started going down 20% every year.
What do you attribute that to?
Some of it was, you know, we had some tough years with weather, and actually the crop, you know, we were rotating back on the land that had strawberries in, you know, not that long before it, and so our production went down a little bit that way. But in the whole industry, the pick your own just started dying in the mid 80s. California was coming on. You could get strawberries year round in the stores, which you never used to be able to do. So we had competition with California, and I think, you know, the fact that more and more housewives were working, you know, so they had two income families, and come Saturday or Sunday they weren't interested in going out and picking strawberries, you know.
So you used to have people coming out all week long during the season?
Yeah. Busy.
And then you're saying that by the early 80s, mid 80s, it was what? Just the weekend?
Definitely weekend were our bigger times, starting in the mid 80s. Yeah.
Did you invest in other farms or in anything else at the time?
Yes, actually, my brother and I bought 2 farms in 1982, which added like 235 acres. We bought that in 82. They were adjoining farms, and just thought it was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. And you know, we had this big income coming in with the strawberries, and of course, when that turned around in the mid 80s, we ended up selling one of the farms, a 200-acre farm, and
where were these farms?
So a small farm was just to the west of us. It butted right up. It was a 35-acre dairy farm, and then the farm east of us, it was 200 acres, and we just touched at a corner, but that ran almost all the way down to the interstate. And
okay, and today, or let's say you move into the 90s, and how did the industry perform through the 90s? What did you do to accommodate declining crop, fewer people, and ultimately what did you decide to do?
So in the mid 80s, we sold the 200 acres, and at that time, there was my father, and we had a full-time hired man, and my brother and myself. So we had four families that had a, you know, income was required to survive on the farm. So my brother could see the writing on the wall, so he went back to school and got his law degree. And in the early 90s, my mother came down with Alzheimer's disease, and so my father was spending more time taking care of her. And we had been cutting the acreage back in the strawberries significantly. We were probably down to about 30 acres. Sometime in that period, my brother, we started growing, due to my brother, we started growing raspberries, and we probably had about 25, 30 acres of raspberries, mostly summer raspberries.
That was
And-
pick your own as well.
pick your own. I'll pick your own too. Trying to diversify some and getting some more income into the.
Okay, so your dad was spending more time with your mother because of her illness.
Correct. Yeah.
And what did this do in terms of your responsibilities?
So I was basically taking over. My brother became an attorney, and he was working up in Milwaukee, and I was running all the day-to-day duties of the farm. And I have 3 sons, and they were in high school and growing up, and we still were paying off this debt that we went from buying, these farms and the original debt. And in 1999, a developer from the Chicago area approached us wanting to build a golf course development. And at the time, our 2 older sons didn't show any interest in agriculture. And I thought it was an opportunity to get out of debt. And so basically in 2000, we sold, excuse me. So the farm at that time was about 400 acres, and or a little bit over 400 acres anyway. We sold everything but 8 acres to this golf course development. We kept the homestead. It was due to my brother that he said, no, we'll never sell that homestead, we'll keep that. So we kept 8 acres and sold this, the remaining land to this golf course development.
And that became?
Strawberry Creek. And so it was an unusual situation because we never thought that they would buy it, because at the time the city and Bristol were in a land fight, and the city had put an airport overlay going out over the 3 miles from the airport. And so with this airport overlay, you couldn't build anything that could house people in overnight. So even though it was going to be a golf course, we knew that they wanted to build homes around the golf course. And so we just never thought that this deal was going to go through. But Bristol and the city were able to work out their differences, and the deal went through.
So they just kept the golf course in the overlay and the other buildings just outside of it? Or?
Well, when they put in this overlay, they carved out Whitecaps. Because that was definitely in 3 miles, that was in the city, but they went out, and so they did away with the overlay. Yeah, basically, I think there's some stipulations now as far as like maybe have to insulate it a little bit more or something for airplane noises, but I'm not sure all those stipulations.
And then once you were down to 8 acres, did you own anything else at that time?
Sure. Well, when we sold the property to this golf course development, my father had started a C corporation and had divvied up the stock between my brother and my 2 sisters. And a C corporation is not eligible for capital gains. So if you owned it individually, you could have taken that money and paid the 20% capital gains tax on it. But because it was a C corporation, you would have paid the 20%, and then that money would come into the corporation, and then the corporation would have paid taxes on it. So basically, about half the money would have gone out to taxes. So in avoiding the taxes, we did what's called a like-kind exchange. And so we took the sale of the property, and we bought 6 apartment buildings, 4 in Racine and 2 in Kenosha, and we ended up buying 2 farms in Indiana, strictly as an investment. And
And do you have them today?
We do. The apartment buildings have been a good investment. We've got a wonderful company that manages farms, so we're not involved at all in the day-to-day operation of them. We just sold one of the farms in Indiana and exchanged it for a farm right across the road on Highway 50 from us. And my son, who has taken over the operation, plans to expand over onto this property. So.
Okay, and what is he planning on doing with that new acreage south of Highway 50?
So on the south side of Highway 50, he's going to be growing, moving the raspberries operation over on that side, and he's gotten involved in, it's called entertainment farming, similar to what Jerry Smith Farms does. They, it's an outing for the people and their kids, you know, and so there's playground equipment and
events and activities kind of thing?
Pardon me?
Events?
Yes, events, correct, yeah, events. And the first year of the COVID, he planted 20 acres of sunflowers due to the coaching of my brother, and it was just a phenomenal hit. You know, Illinois, that first year of COVID, were shut down completely. You know, the bars, the restaurants, Great America, you know, all the fairs, everything was shut down. And so people were just dying to get out and do something. So in this 20 acres of sunflowers, with staggered plantings, he just made paths in them, and people came out and picked sunflowers and just walked through the sunflowers. And I mean, it was just phenomenal for the start of a business. I mean,
so your son is now growing raspberries and sunflowers on the south side of Highway 50.
That will happen, correct? Yeah, that will.
I mean, that's been it's in the ground now.
Not in yet, but it will be coming up this
okay.
coming year. Yeah.
Sorry. What happened to the strawberries?
So the field, the land, so when we sold the property back in 2000, our neighbor's property, the Brown farm, Mrs. Brown, her son had been farming it, and he moved out to the west part of Wisconsin, out by the Mississippi River. So that became available to rent, and so we rented the 60 acres, which was adjacent to our farm, from Mrs. Brown for 25 years, 24 years, and she passed away about 4 years ago, and the farm was sold to a development up in Milwaukee, and they have plans on building a community on it. And so we've been renting it on a year-to-year basis from this development, but we know at some point we won't have it any longer.
So will that be the end of strawberries?
No, when this took place, we have good friends, and our neighbors to the northwest of us, the Fowlers, agreed. We entered into a long-term lease on their farm, and we've moved all the strawberries over on Highway MB. Back in the 80s, when Highway 50 was still a two-lane highway, the state didn't want us to have an entrance on Highway 50. There was too much traffic, and they were afraid there'd be accidents. So we were able to rent some land from the Fowlers, and we had the entrance down on Highway MB. So to get into the farm during the strawberry season, you turned down MB, and you came, and we drove through the Fowler farm into our farm. And so we've had this wonderful relationship with the Fowlers all these years, and right now they have rented it for many years to a good friend of mine who grows corn and soybeans on there. And so we are actually just of the 95 acres approximate that they own, we're renting 40 of it to grow about 20 acres of strawberries. And so we've put in all the infrastructure for irrigation, and we're able to get water from the city, and it's been a very good adventure.
So how has the growing and selling of strawberries changed over the years?
When I started with my father, we had a lot of people coming out to pick strawberries to make preserves, jams. I mean, they would pick, you know, when they would open their trunks, they would be just solid strawberries. And of course, we don't see that hard at all anymore. We sell now in a 4-quart basket, and people come to the farm and they might pick 2-3 baskets, and we're assuming some of those are given away, you know, to neighbors and stuff. Our son just implemented entrance fee to the farm because we're having a lot of people coming to the farm, and they would come out with one basket, but they've been there for 4 hours, and so we feel sorry for the locals who have to pay this fee, but you know, it's another way of raising raising our income, so.
Okay, do you remember any particular customer who would come to the farm and buy an enormous amount of strawberries when they would come, or there wasn't any one customer who stood out that they'd?
We've got a lot of customers from Chicago area who are Polish descent, and a lot of new Polish people, and so they're probably one of our biggest customers with the Polish, and we advertise down in the Polish newspapers and they come to pick strawberries, yeah.
Good, reliable
pickers.
Year after
year.
year.
It doesn't matter if it's hot, they're out there picking strawberries.
Okay, how about, you mentioned irrigation. How about any changes in technology, anything like that has affected the growth of the farm?
Yes, well, for many years growing strawberries, we always had overhead irrigation, where we would put a line of pipe every 60 feet, and then we'd have sprinklers every 60 feet. And we'd use that for, once we planted the strawberries, we'd use it for watering them to get them established. But the main purpose of the irrigation was for frost protection in the spring, when the strawberry buds would start to flower. They're very susceptible to cold. So if it drops below 32 degrees, you can kill that flower. And then once you kill that flower, there won't be a strawberry. That flower forms a strawberry. So when the temperature gets down to 33 or 34, we start up irrigation, and we're able to keep the bud temperature at 32 or above.
And that's by freezing, or?
Yes, so the water freezes on the blossom, and it creates heat. It creates BTUs when it changes from a liquid to a solid, and by continuing applying water, sprinklers, we can keep the blossom from freezing probably down to about 25 degrees. If there's no wind.
Okay. And what else do you use those same overhead sprinklers to water the strawberries?
We do, but when we sold the land to the golf course, we lost our water supply, and so we switched over to using city water from a hydrant. And in doing so, it's a little bit more expensive, but we've gone to drip irrigation, where when we plant the strawberries, we install a 5/8 inch tube underneath every row, and it's got an emitter every 16 inches. So that's how we water, and that's how we fertigate the strawberries. And it's getting a nice clean water source from the city. It's a very nice way of getting water to the strawberries. So when you're picking strawberries now on the farm, we could be watering at the same time, and you would never know that it'd be.
Any other technology that has been beneficial? Anything with the equipment?
Oh, back in 7 or 8 years ago, we've gone to GPS auto steer on the tractors. And so if you look down the rows and they're straight as an arrow, it's not because somebody has practiced all their life making straight rows. It's because it's auto steer and it's making these rows straight. And that helps us when we come in to do another operation in the field that might not be the same 4 rows that we planted. And yeah, auto steer has been a big help to us for sure.
Okay, you mentioned that the season was 3 weeks.
Correct.
How do you take care of strawberries over the year in preparation for a 3-week picking season? So what do you do? Let's say you have your 3 weeks of harvesting and they're now done for the year. What happens the rest of the year until the next season?
So the first thing we do right after the harvest, as soon as we can get in there, we go and we mow the field. We mow all the leaves off the strawberries. And then we go in with a cultivator that we've changed, that we can cut the rows back, because as the season progresses and there's more runners, the row wants to get wider and wider, and we cut it back to about 14 inches. Throw some dirt up on top of it and then start watering the heck out of them. And within about 2 or 3 weeks, they have new leaves, and they're starting to look like a nice row of strawberries. And then we constantly in there are pulling weeds the rest of the season. We fertilize them twice a week. And that's about it until the fall. Once we have a good frost and they become dormant, and then we go out and we put straw on top of the strawberries. Right now we're using round bales of straw that we buy from. We buy the straw from some local farmers right out of the field, and we bale it and bring the round bales back to the farm, and then we have a machine that we can spread those round bales out onto the strawberries.
And then we're talking this time of year, you've done all that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when do you pick up again next year?
Probably the end of March. We'll go out there, and we have a machine that blows the straw up into the air. So it takes, we prefer to do it when we have a real strong wind, and we blow the straw up in the air, and it spreads it out, and it comes down, and it's not so, the snow, during the winter, the snow compacts the straw, and it hardens it up, and this loosens everything up. So we go through this chopper and we do that, and then we come through with a rake, and we take the straw right off the top of the roll and put it in between the roll. And then then the first thing we do is start laying the irrigation pipe out, so we're going to be prepared for a frost.
And you are still fertilizing at this time?
Then we'll start fertilizing again, sure.
And then once frost is all not a concern anymore, then it's just...
Then we pull the pipe out of the field, so it's not in the way of the customers picking. Then start preparing, get everything set up for the season.
Okay. What do you like most about the job that you have had since you're now semi-retired as
Yes.
co-owner? Just a few years prior, what did you like best about farming?
I've always enjoyed driving tractors, and of course the newer tractors are even more enjoyable to drive. The thing about strawberry farming is it changes, from day to day, from week to week, and so even if there's a job that you don't really enjoy, it doesn't last. It's not that long, and there's not a lot of something that you would do all the time, every day. And so, fortunate not having any animals, at this time of year now, it's more in a laid back mode. We work on equipment.
And vacation season.
Pardon me?
And a vacation season.
And vacation,
right.
sure, we take our vacation. Go.
So, the best thing about you being on the farm, owning the farm, working the farm, what's the best thing about all that?
I think the best thing my wife and I have gotten out of it is raising our family on the farm. We have 3 boys, and the 2 oldest are involved with aviation. And I never thought that our youngest would come back and take over the farm, but we're so fortunate and proud of him. But even though the 2 boys, the oldest ones, were not farmers, they still got a good, I think they're really good workers, and they got that from raising up on a farm.
Do you regret not going to college?
I don't. I don't.
How about the rest of the family?
So it's unusual. So my grandfather graduated from Madison. He had 4 kids. All 4 of his kids graduated from Madison, and I'm one of 4. And I have my 3 siblings all graduated from college and went on to get higher degrees. And so I'm the only one in 3 generations who never went to college. And 2 of our boys graduated from college. One didn't. But I've really had a good life. I have no regrets. I loved school. When I was going to high school, I just loved school, but it was because of social, not because I loved learning. I just loved being around people.
Would you do it all over again?
Yep, I don't think I'd change much. I sure would.
Thank you for talking with me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.